Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of Understanding Chess with Trenton. Today we are going to be talking about basic tactics, which I consider to be the weapons of chess. Now, the reason we're kind of backing off a little bit is just getting some feedback about the earlier episodes. People say they're informative, however, sometimes they can be a little confused about what's actually going on in the games, so I decided we're going to take a step back and we're just going to talk about some of what tactics are. Now let's go ahead and just get a brief definition of what tactics are here. So the definition is a move or sequence of moves that forces an immediate gain. And that includes material, which would be pieces or pawns that you win from your opponent, or checkmate, which is obviously the ultimate goal. It's very important that we distinguish tactics from strategy. Tactics are the means by which strategy is implemented. And so I'm going to try to keep it pretty simple for this lesson here. We're going to, for the most part, be using skeleton type games, very basic, just so people have an idea of what they need to be looking at during their games. So we're going to leave a lot of the pieces and pawns off the board for much of the lessons. Now, some people can be daunted by tactics, but I'd like to share a quote here with you from Garry Kasparov, who was the #1 player in the world for over 20 years, and a lot of people consider him to be the greatest player of all time. He says, "Tactics involve calculations that can tax the human brain, but when you boil them down, they are actually the simplest part of chess and are almost trivial compared to strategy." Now, why is this? Let's look at another quote here from a different world champion, Max Owa, who explains, "Strategy requires thought. Tactics require observation." Okay, so strategy is oftentimes thinking about what your plan is, what plan you are going to make to gain an advantage on your opponent. Tactics are things that are visible on the board, just seeing how things look, and then determining from there what a good move might be to get some sort of immediate gain. Let's take a look at one last quote here. This is from Sun Tzu, the famous Chinese philosopher, from his famous work, The Art of War. He says, "Strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat." Now, obviously, Sun Tzu here was talking about military strategy, but this totally applies 100% to chess. If you try to implement some sort of strategy and you don't have tactics involved, if it's going to be successful at all, it's going to take a very, very long time to actually implement. On the other hand, using these sort of tactics willy-nilly without any sort of strategy or thinking or planning behind them is just going to result in a lot of chaos, but against other good players, you're probably just going to end up losing the game. One other thing I want to note here, this is an image here of Mikhail Tal, who was world champion from 1960 to 1961. He's often considered one of the greatest, if not the greatest, attacking players of all time. And if you're trying to look more into tactics, then I would highly recommend looking at some of his games. A lot of his strategy that he had in games was based just around setting up tactical situations. So if his opponent had some sort of deep strategical thinking, oftentimes his plan was just to try to blow it up, and he would very often sacrifice pieces to do so, just to create situations on the chessboard, because he thought that his tactical observation was going to always be better than any opponent he played, and very often he was correct. So we may end up looking at a game or two of his in later episodes, but if you want some further reading into tactics and you want to look at some more brilliant tactical games, he's one where I recommend looking at his games if you want to see some more of that. So we're going to go ahead and we'll dive right in, starting with our first tactic, which is going to be the fork. Okay, so the first tactic that we're going to look at today is called a fork. It's pretty basic. Any piece can fork. All it means is that one piece is attacking two pieces at once. One piece may escape, but the other piece will not. So here's an incredibly basic example. If you were white right now, you could fork both of black's knights simply by playing pawn to e5. As you can see, you could have one knight or the other move away to a different square, but in the case of that happening, all that would happen after that is that the pawn would take the knight. Okay, so here we have another example of a fork which is called a knight fork, and knight forks are often the most popular in chess. They're the nicest used for the knights because the knight can jump over other pieces, so it doesn't have other pieces in the way usually to block it from creating a fork if one exists. Now hopefully in this situation you can see what square the white knight could go on if it's his turn to create the fork. But if you can't, all you have to do is think of knight to f6. And now, as you can see, the white knight is checking the king and is also attacking the rook. It can't be taken by the king, so even if king were to move out of the way, which it would have to since it was check, then the knight can come in and take the rook for free. Okay, so here we have another variation. Bishops can also fork, obviously. I hope you're seeing a theme here, but even though the bishop is already attacking the rook, if it were to be the next move to play, bishop could move here to e6, and in the same way as the pawn before, just a little bit longer, we also have a bishop fork. So once again, the king would have to move out of the way since it is in check. Let's say it moves here, and then the bishop would get to take the rook for free. All right, now we have an example of a rook fork. Pretty easy to tell, just like the other pieces. Just make it so that it can attack both at once. The rook could move over here to e5, and now it would be attacking both the knight and the pawn. Since the knight is usually considered more valuable, it would move out of the way, and then rook gets a pawn. All right, and lastly we have the queen fork. Queens are always fun because they can go many different directions at once, and queens are actually capable of creating forks along multiple diagonals and files. So hopefully you can figure out where the queen should move next, and hopefully you picked d5. Now you can see the queen has both the king and the rook and the knight lined up in its sights. It can pick whatever one it wants to take after the king would be forced to move. Probably going to want to go for the rook. Okay guys, so we're going to have a little bit more of a real life type example here, where we have a sort of pawn structures. Both kings have actually castled, got a couple more pieces on the board. So if you're white, can you see where you could move to create a fork? And if you've been paying attention, you would probably see right away that a good spot is to move the knight to e7. What happens now? Both the king and the queen are forked. Obviously the king would have to move. Let's say he moves over here to f8. Pawns can't take the knight, nothing can take it, it can't block it in any way. So black would then lose the queen and very likely would lose the game in the end. So the next tactic that we're going to cover very briefly is called the discovered attack. This is a tactic where one piece will move and it will create a new attack on a piece because the piece that moved wasn't there before. So in this situation right here, it's black to move. Now it looks like white is winning according to material, but black can do a counter strategy. What it can do right now is black can play bishop takes h2. Check. Now because the king is in check, it will either have to move or it will have to take back. But look what just happened. Because the bishop moved from this square, the rook is now attacking the white queen. So let's say white takes back with the knight. Now the rook can come down and take the queen and even the odds just a little bit. Okay guys, so now we're going to look at a famous trap that occurs in some chess openings, and what's called the Petrov defense, and it's based off the idea of a discovered attack. So let's say the game starts normally with e4, e5, knight f3. Then if black decides to play what's called the Petrov defense with knight to f6, white can respond by taking this unprotected pawn with his knight. Knight takes e5. Now, if black were to try to respond in kind with knight takes e4, white can then play queen to e2, attacking the knight. If black then tries to move his knight back to where it was to get out of danger, then white can play knight to c6, discovered attack, and check on the king. Black can try to block it with the queen or with the bishop. Either way, this knight is guarding both of those squares. Let's say he plays with the bishop, and then the knight is going to be able to take the queen right out of the gate because of the discovered attack with the queen. Okay guys, so we are going to now look at the tactic called the pin, and we're going to demonstrate it by showing you a very popular and famous chess opening called the Nimzo Indian defense that is based around the idea of a very annoying pin. So let's say white starts out the game with d4. Then black is going to respond knight to f6. White can then play c4. Black plays e6. After the common move knight to c3, black would then play bishop to b4. And this is the idea. This knight is now pinned to the defense of the king. And by that, I mean the knight cannot move out of the way because that is technically illegal, because the bishop would then put the king in check. So because of that, this knight is stuck and cannot move, at least temporarily for the moment. And black is going to try to play around this idea of this stuck knight and try to give white some weaknesses over here because of the pin. Okay guys, here's another basic example of a pin in effect. So now, as you can see, it would be white's move to play. If white were to make a simple move trying to take this knight and attack the king with, say, bishop takes c6, well, there's not really a problem there because the king can just take right back and nothing has really been accomplished for white. However, right now, this knight is currently pinned to the king by this bishop. So white can play instead knight to e5. And now black is going to lose the knight because there's nothing that the king can do to defend it or get out of the way. It's being attacked twice now, and the knight is stuck and can't move out of the way by taking the knight that's attacking it, because that would then leave the king in check. So if white tried to play some other move, taking out the pin, such as king to b6. Now, white can take the knight either with the bishop or with the knight. Let's say it takes it with the bishop. And now the king can't take back because the knight is also defending the bishop at the time. So white has just won a knight. Okay guys, so now we're going to briefly go over a skewer. Skewer is sort of like a mix between a pin and a discovered attack. So if white were to move right now, it could create a skewer with the black king and queen simply by moving the king out of the way. So let's say the king would then move to e1, and now that's actually check, because this rook is now skewering the black king and queen. So black has no choice but to move the king out of the way. He can move it wherever he wants out of the way, and then white can come down and take the queen and win the game. Okay, so please note in this same sort of position here that if it's black's turn to move, the skewer doesn't quite work as well. Let's say the black king moves out of the way to, say, e5, which is check. Then the white king has to move out of the way, of course. However, he can just move to a square that also defends the rook. For example, e1, where we had him before. And now it's black's turn to move. I mean, black could come down and take the rook, but then the king just takes the queen, and it's going to be a draw. Okay, here's another example of a skewer in action. So it's white's turn to play. He can actually sacrifice a piece here, but we'll soon get it back by creating a skewer. If at this point, white plays knight to a4, then black can take back with b takes a4. However, white can now play rook to b8 with a skewer on the black king and queen. The black king has to move, and the white rook gets to come down and take the queen and create a winning position. All right, so the next tactic that we're going to talk about is deflection. And deflection's a little hard to show in a skeleton game, so we have to have some pieces on the board. But the idea of the deflection is that you take away a defender of a key square by moving it somewhere where it does not defend a key square or piece anymore. Now, in this situation, it's black's turn to move. Can you see what move that black could make to cause a deflection that will win the game? Okay. Now hopefully you can see that black could make checkmate if he could move this queen down here to f2. However, this queen is defending that square, as well as the king, obviously, but the queen is the primary defender. So black can then play rook to d1, check. And now black is going to win, because if white then plays queen takes d1, now black can come down and play queen to f2, checkmate, because this defender is no longer on a file where it can defend. Now let's say after rook to d1, instead white decided not to take with the queen and wanted to take with the king. King takes d1. Well, now this is another deflection because the king was guarding this square as well. So now black plays queen takes f2, and this is also checkmate for black because he is in check. He can't move to any squares. There's no defender that can take him. Any of these squares that he could possibly move to, he's still being attacked. So that'd be another way to end the game by use of deflection. Okay, here's another deflection example. It's white's turn to move. As you can see, white has a strong attack on this h7 square. And if he can get the queen over here onto h7 without it being attacked, that would be checkmate. However, right now the black queen is guarding that square. So what move should white play? The correct answer is rook to a8. And now this rook is attacking the queen. The queen cannot move out of the way because that would be illegal. So the queen would then be forced to take the rook. And now this h7 square is undefended. So now queen takes h7 is officially checkmate. Okay guys, so this is the tactic known as a decoy, which is not to be confused with deflection. In this situation, you are trying to lure an enemy piece to a place where you want it to go. So in this situation, it's white to move. If white wants, he can make a queen check down here on c4, but then the king can just move away and hasn't really accomplished anything. So instead, white wants the king to come to a place where it cannot escape. If white were to instead play b5 check, the king cannot escape to the back rank. The king would be forced to take the pawn, and now that it's on a better square for white, white can come in and play c4 check mate. Okay guys, here's another example of the usage of a decoy. Remember, it's luring away an enemy piece into a square you want it to go. So in this case, it's white to move. White looks like he has a losing game. But what move can white play to even the odds? The correct answer is to move this pawn to d8 and promote to a queen. Check. And now the black king is forced to take the queen. But now white can use another tactic we learned from before, the knight fork. Knight takes f7, wins both the rook and forces the king to move. And now the knight can take the queen.